Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a really ancient journey, exploring one of the foundational texts of Buddhist monastic law.
Right. We're diving into the early sections of the Pali Vinaya.
Specifically the Pārājika. And these aren't just, minor rules.
No, not at all. They're the gravest offenses, things that lead to immediate, irreversible expulsion from the monastic order.
And our sources for this deep dive, they're excerpts from Pārājika.md. It's a document that's, it's rich with historical accounts, dialogues.
And the very first rules laid down for the monks.
Think of it as a kind of living blueprint for a pretty profound way of life.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to unpack the key insights from these sometimes quite intricate narratives.
So not just what the rules are.
Right, but crucially why they came into being.
Yeah.
And the profound wisdom sort of woven into how they were formed.
You'll hear about a surprising confrontation.
Yeah, and some pretty dramatic cosmic reactions, actually.
And the very human stories that shaped these ancient traditions. So we're unpacking the incidents that led to the Buddha's initial rulings, exploring that fascinating interplay between the practical needs of a community.
And timeless spiritual principles.
Okay.
Let's dig in.
Let's do it. So to really get the origins of these rules, our source material takes us first to this ancient town, Verañjā. The Buddha was there with a large group, like 500 bhikkhus, fully ordained monks.
Right, a big assembly.
And word about him had definitely spread, but it wasn't all positive feedback.
No, and what's really striking is how the text just throws us right into a challenge, a direct challenge to the Buddha's reputation.
Yeah, this Brahmin, he's from the priestly class, right?
That's right, named Verañjā. He confronts the Buddha, basically listing off all these accusations he's heard.
And these weren't like small complaints either.
No.
The Brahmin said he heard the Buddha didn't salute elders or offer them seats.
Which was a big deal in that culture.
Totally. And that he was considered tasteless, unoccupied, a preacher of non-action, even an annihilationist.
A detester.
And without a womb, for a spiritual leader, that sounds pretty damning, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Which raises the key question, how does the Buddha handle this? Such direct criticism.
Yeah. What's his response?
Well, he doesn't actually deny the labels, which is interesting. Instead, he masterfully reinterprets every single one through the lens of his enlightenment.
Okay. How so? Like the not saluting elders bit.
Right. So for that one, he basically says that in the entire cosmos, heavens, earth, everywhere, there's no one actually worthy of his salutation.
Wow.
And he adds, if you were to salute someone like that, their head would literally split apart.
Okay, so that's a statement.
It is, and he does this with all of them. He takes these negative-sounding things and flips them.
So tasteless.
Means he's abandoned all sensual desires. Unoccupied means he's shed all material attachments.
Preacher of non-action.
He clarifies. He teaches non-action towards evil deeds. Annihilationist. Well, he teaches the annihilation of lust, hatred, and delusion.
Ah, okay. Detester.
Means he detests evil conduct. And without a womb, that refers to having completely transcended any future rebirth.
It's an incredible display, kind of rhetorical skill, but it's also showing the depth of his realization, right?
Precisely. This whole dialogue, it just powerfully sets the stage. It establishes the Buddha's unique sort of supreme position.
And then he uses an analogy.
Yeah, a really vivid one. He compares himself to the very first chick to break out of an eggshell.
Okay.
Calling himself the eldest and foremost of the world because he alone broke through that eggshell of ignorance that, enveloped everyone else.
That's a strong claim. So after making that claim, how does he back it up? Does the text explain how he got there, how he became that first chick?
It does, yeah. He then systematically goes through his path to enlightenment. He calls it the 3 knowledges or 3 breakthroughs.
Achieved during the night, right?
Exactly, each during a different watch of the night. First, there's the knowledge of past lives. His ability to recall just countless previous existences. Details like names, families, what they experienced, how long they lived. He calls this his first breakthrough.
Got it. What's second?
Second is the divine eye. This allowed him to see beings dying and being reborn based on their actions, their karma.
So good actions lead to good rebirths, bad actions to bad ones.
Exactly. That was his second breakthrough. And third, and this is really the heart of it.
The core of liberation.
Right. Knowledge of the destruction of taints, or asavakanya. This is fully understanding suffering, where it comes from, how it ceases, and the path to make it cease.
And it ends with that
It's
realization.
a profound realization. Birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What was to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. His third and final breakthrough.
Wow, and this whole explanation, it works.
It completely convinces the Verañjā Brahmin.
Yeah.
He compares the Buddha's teaching to, like, writing something overturned or revealing something hidden.
So he takes refuge.
He takes refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the community. And then he invites the Buddha and all the monks to stay for the rainy season retreat.
Okay, so the Sangha settles in Verañjā for the rains retreat. But then they hit a snag. A really serious practical problem.
Yeah, a severe famine hits the region.
And our source says the monks were reduced to eating horse fodder, like from horse dealers' stalls.
Having to pound it in mortars just to make it edible, you can really feel the hardship there.
Definitely highlights the real-world difficulties they face, even with the Buddha right there.
Absolutely. And the narrative then brings in one of the Buddha's chief disciples, Mahamoggallana.
Ah, the one known for his psychic powers, right? And compassion.
That's him. Seeing how much the monks are suffering, he comes up with two pretty radical suggestions.
Okay, what are they?
First, he suggests using his powers to literally turn the earth upside down.
Turn the earth. Why?
So the monks could eat the nutritious soil, the cake underneath.
Seriously, what did the Buddha say to that?
He refused, flat out. Said it would harm countless beings who depend on the earth's surface.
Okay, fair enough. What was idea number 2?
Mahamoggallana suggested the whole Sangha should just travel, using powers again, presumably, to this mythical land called Uttarakuru.
Why there?
Because it was known for having effortless abundance. They could just gather alms there easily.
And the Buddha's response?
Again, no. Rejected.
So even facing starvation, he turns down these supernatural sort of easy fixes. What does that really tell us? It's not just compassion, is it?
No, I think it shows his radical pragmatism, as you said. His wisdom is so grounded. He prioritizes non-harm, but also self-reliance within the normal framework of monastic life, not relying on miracles.
Right, okay.
And this whole situation then leads into another really interesting discussion, this time started by Sariputta, the other chief disciple.
One known for wisdom.
Exactly. He reflects on something important for the future. Why did the teachings of some previous Buddhas last a long time while others just faded away quickly?
That is a vital question, isn't it? For any tradition hoping to endure. So what was the Buddha's explanation? What made the difference?
He explained that some earlier Buddhas, he names Vipassi, Sikhi, and Visabhadru, they weren't as inclined to teach really extensively.
Okay.
And crucially, they didn't lay down specific training rules or establish a Patimokkha.
The Patimokkha being that core code of conduct, the rules were cited regularly.
That's the one. So without that clear formal structure,
Their communities just dissolved after they passed away. Like the analogy.
they are an unstrung flower scattered by the wind.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They relied more on just direct sort of mental admonition between monks, not formal rules.
Okay, so structure matters for longevity.
Definitely. In contrast, he says, other Buddhas like Kakusanda, Konagamana, and Kassapa did teach extensively, and they did establish detailed rules and the Patimokkha.
And their holy lives endured for a very long time.
Right, like well-strung flowers, resilient.
This brings up a really interesting point then. If rules are so important for lasting, why didn't this Buddha, Gautama Buddha, lay them down immediately? Verañjā actually asks this, right? Suggests maybe it's time.
He does. And the Buddha's reply here is absolutely key to understanding how the Vinaya, the discipline, developed.
What does he say?
He says a teacher, a Buddha, doesn't lay down rules until, and this is the phrase, taint-causing states or blemishes, actually appear within the Sangha itself.
Ah, so it's reactive, not proactive.
In a way, yes. And there are other conditions, too. Rules are set when the Sangha has grown large, gained prominence, has substantial material support, and when monks have expensive learning.
So it's about maturity and problems arising.
Pretty much. He emphasizes that at that specific moment in Verañjā, the Sangha was still pure, faultless, without blemish. Even the newest monk was a stream enterer, meaning they were already on an irreversible path to enlightenment.
Okay, so the conditions weren't right yet. No blemishes.
Not yet. But this sets the stage perfectly for the first blemish to emerge.
And it emerges in the story of Sudinna.
Exactly. The dramatic story of Sudinna, who was a wealthy man's son from a place called Kalandakagama.
Right. So Sudinna hears the Buddha preach.
And has this insight, realizing how hard it is to live a truly pure life as a householder with all the ties and responsibilities.
So he decides he wants to ordain to become a monk.
Correct. But first, there's a hurdle. He needs his parents' permission.
Because the Buddha wouldn't ordain sons without it.
Right. And his parents, understandably, they are devastated.
He's their only son, right? Raised in luxury.
Exactly. Beloved son, they absolutely refuse to let him go. So what does Sudinna do? Does he argue? Plead?
No, he does something much more extreme. He stages a hunger strike.
Wow.
Lies down on the bare ground for 7 days straight, vowing he'll either die or be allowed to ordain.
That's intense. Real conviction, but also putting immense pressure on his parents.
Totally. Eventually, his friends get involved. They manage to persuade the parents, basically saying, look, it's better to let him ordain than let him die. And hey, maybe he won't like it. Maybe he'll come back.
Ah, the classic he might come back argument.
Exactly. And the parents reluctantly agree. They consent.
So Sudinna finally gets ordained, and he really throws himself into it.
Oh, yeah. He takes on austere practices, living in the forest, only eating food received on alms round, wearing robes made from discarded rags, going on sequential alms rounds without skipping houses. Really dedicated.
But then, another famine. Famines seem to feature prominently here.
They do. This time a famine strikes the region where he's staying, near Vesali.
Okay, so what does he do?
Well, this famine leads him to think about his wealthy family back in Vesali. He reasons, if he goes back there, his relatives can gain merit by giving him food.
And he won't starve. Practical thinking, in a way.
Right. So he heads back. His relatives are absolutely thrilled to see him. They send him 60 huge meal offerings. Overjoyed.
60.
But then comes the critical moment. He's doing his alms round in his home village. And he sees a maidservant from his old household about to throw away some stale rice gruel. He asks her to put it in his bowl instead.
And she recognizes him.
She recognizes him by his hands, his feet, his voice. She runs and tells his mother.
Oh, boy.
So his father comes out, sees him eating this stale gruel, and insists on bringing him home.
And once he's home?
The parents pull out all the stops, a massive, lavish attempt to lure him back to lay life. They literally display these huge piles of gold and silver. So massive, the text says, one person couldn't even see someone standing on the other side.
Incredible wealth.
And then they bring in his former wife, beautifully adorned, trying to tempt him.
Okay, so wealth and his former wife. What's Sudinna's reaction?
They urge him, come on, revert to the lower life, enjoy this wealth, make merit. But Sudinna just refuses, flat out. He's perfectly content in the holy life.
Strong resolve.
Yeah. But his father keeps pushing about the wealth, what to do with it. And Sudinna gives this radical suggestion.
What's that?
He says, just throw it all in the middle of the Ganges River. Get rid of the anxiety it causes.
Yeah. I bet the father wasn't too pleased with that.
The text says he was displeased, yes.
So the wealth angle fails.
Yeah.
What about the wife?
His former wife approaches him then, and she asks him, basically, what kind of celestial nymphs are you practicing celibacy for? Like, what's the heavenly payoff you're aiming for?
Interesting question. How does he respond?
He just addresses her very formally as sister.
Sister zoning her, essentially.
Pretty much. And at that word, sister, she faints, just collapses.
Because she realizes it's truly over. His commitment is total.
The finality hits her.
Okay, so temptations failed. What happens next? They give him a meal.
They do. But after the meal, his mother comes to him with one last really crucial request.
What is it?
She asks him to provide a seed, an heir.
An heir. What?
So their family lineage continues. And crucially, so their vast wealth isn't confiscated by the local rulers, the Lachavis, when the parents die.
A very practical concern for them. A Sudinna?
Sudinna, well, the text suggests he perhaps saw this as a way to fulfill a kind of filial duty, maybe? Within his understanding at the time, he agrees. He says, this is possible.
Oh, okay. So what happens?
The source states very clearly. Sudinna then takes his former wife into the Mahavana, the great forest nearby, and performs sexual intercourse with his former wife 3 times. And it adds this crucial detail. not seeing the fault in a rule not yet laid down.
Right, because the rule hadn't been made yet. He didn't technically break a rule that existed.
Exactly. And she conceives a child.
And then the cosmic reaction you mentioned.
The text describes how earth deities and then gods from various heavens start proclaiming loudly that the Sangha was pure, but now Sudinna has created a blemish, a tumor.
So his action is seen as polluting the whole community, even from the perspective of the gods.
It reflects that high standard of purity expected.
Right. And a child is eventually born.
Yes, a son. And they name him Bajaka.
Which means seed. Very fitting.
It is.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the text notes that later in life, both Sudinna's former wife and the son, Bajaka, actually ordain themselves.
Then both become arahants, fully enlightened.
Both attain Aranshat.
Wow. But what about Sudinna himself? How does he feel after the act?
He's consumed by remorse, overcome by it. He becomes thin, wretched, withdrawn, deeply regrets his inability to live that perfectly pure, holy life he aspired to.
So the other monks notice this change in him.
I do. They ask him what's wrong, and he confesses what he did.
And how do they react?
They admonish him severely. They remind him, the Buddha taught the Dhamma for dispassion, for detachment, for letting go of craving. How could you possibly contemplate engaging in passion and attachment when the whole teaching is aimed at the exact opposite?
A fair point. So this leads to...
This leads to the pivotal moment.
Yeah.
The monks report the whole incident to the Buddha. The Buddha calls Sudinna in, questions him directly. Sudinna admits it. Yes, Blessed One, I did this.
And the Buddha's reaction, is it harsh?
It's a powerful rebuke. He calls Sudinna's actions unfitting, unsuitable, unworthy of a monk.
And he uses that strong comparison.
Yes, the really stark one. He says it would actually be better for a monk to insert his penis into the mouth of a deadly venomous snake or into a pit of burning coals.
Whoa, why better?
Because those actions would only cause death or terrible pain in this life. But the act Sudinna committed, sexual intercourse, could lead to rebirth in hell, a much worse long-term consequence.
Okay, that puts it in perspective.
He condemns the act itself using strong terms. Village practice, low, defiling, private, a dualistic coupling.
And it's based on this specific incident, Sudinna's act,
that the Buddha, for 10 specific reasons he lays out, finally establishes the very first Pārājika rule, the most serious category.
And those 10 reasons, they focus on the community.
Yes, things like the well-being and comfort of the Sangha, suppressing monks who behave badly, making things easier for well-behaved monks, restraining these taints or defilements now, and preventing future ones.
Helping convert people who aren't yet converted, increasing the faith of those who are.
Ensuring the stability of the true Dhamma, the teachings, and supporting the Verañjā, the discipline itself.
A comprehensive set of reasons. And the rule itself, the initial wording.
Whatever bhikkhu should engage in sexual intercourse, he's defeated, he is not in communion. Simple, direct, and severe.
Defeated, not in communion, that's it.
That's it. Expulsion. So after this first rule is laid down, based on Sudinna.
The text doesn't just stop there, does it? It goes into incredible detail.
Yeah, it becomes almost like a legal commentary. It starts exploring other cases, further scenarios, to clarify and refine the scope of this rule. It shows how they immediately had to grapple with unforeseen situations.
Like the case with the monkey.
Exactly. A monk apparently engaged in sexual intercourse with a female monkey. And his argument was basically, well, the rule just mentioned humans, didn't it? He tried to find a loophole.
Huh. And the Buddha's response?
Rejected that immediately. He amended the rule on the spot to explicitly include even with a female animal.
So broadening the scope right away based on a real, if strange, case.
Exactly. It shows that immediate need for clarification.
Then there's the case of the Vajrapātaka monks. What happened there?
They also committed sexual intercourse, but they did it without formally renouncing their monastic training first. Later, they felt deep remorse and kind of hoped they could rejoin, get a second chance.
And could they?
The Buddha stated very clearly, a monk who commits this act without first renouncing his training, or at least admitting his weakness, cannot be reordained. Ever.
So it really underscores the permanent nature of the Pārājika offense. It's automatic expulsion, irreversible, like that analogy used later.
Like a man whose head has been cut off. He can't just reattach it and live again in that body.
Yeah.
Same idea for the monk in the community.
Right. And the text then gets super precise with definitions, doesn't it? Incredibly precise. For example, bhikkhu, a monk, is defined very specifically as someone ordained through the formal unanimous act of the Sangha. Training in this context means the higher moral conduct expected.
And sexual intercourse itself gets all those descriptions again.
Yeah, unholy practice, village practice, low practice, defiling, private, dualistic coupling. All synonyms for the prohibited act.
And the act of engaging in it. How specific is that?
Down to even a sesame seed's worth of penetration. Intentional penetration is the key.
And it covers all combinations.
All combinations. Gender, species, human, non-human, animal.
Yeah.
And the orifice used vaginal, anal, or oral. If there's intentional penetration, even minimally, it's Pārājika.
Now, what about consent? That comes up in a really interesting way.
It does. The text is quite nuanced here. If, say, some enemies of a monk were to forcibly hold him down and force a woman onto him,
Okay.
he only commits the Pārājika offense if he consents at any point during the act, the insertion, the time it's inserted, or the withdrawal.
So if he actively resists and does not consent, even if penetration occurs,
Then there's no offense for him, which is highlighted very clearly in the famous case of the nun Upalavan.
she was assaulted, right?
Yes, she was sexually assaulted, but she was explicitly declared not guilty of any offense because she did not consent. Consent is critical for culpability.
That's a really important distinction. What about the state of the other person involved? Does that matter?
Yes, the text considers that too. Whether the partner is awake, asleep, drunk, mentally insane, negligent, or even recently deceased.
Is it dead?
If the body is freshly dead and not yet significantly decomposed, and the monk consents to penetration, it's still Pārājika.
Wow. But if the body is, say, mostly decomposed?
Then it becomes a lesser, though still serious, offense called a thulakaya. It shows this kind of legalistic grading based on circumstances.
The level of detail is just amazing. And there's some really striking examples given to illustrate specific points, aren't there?
Absolutely. Some are quite memorable, even startling.
Like the one about the monk and the young girl.
Right. A monk inserts his thumb into a young girl's private parts, and tragically, she dies as a result. The text explicitly states this is not a Pārājika offense.
Why not? It seems horrific.
Because the specific act prohibited by the first Pārājika is sexual intercourse, defined as penile penetration. This act, while terrible and leading to death, fell under a different category of serious offense, a sengadisasa. It shows how precise the definitions were.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. What about other cases? Gender change.
Yeah, fascinatingly, if a monk or nun spontaneously undergoes a biological change of sex, they are simply allowed to continue their monastic life under the rules appropriate for their new gender.
Quite progressive in a way.
It seems so. And intercourse with close relatives, mother, daughter, sister, even one's former wife like Sudinna is still clearly Pārājika. No exceptions there.
And then there are the autosexual acts.
Right. The text explicitly covers cases like a monk who is flexible enough to perform oral sex on himself, or a monk with anatomical peculiarities allowing him to perform anal sex on himself. Both are explicitly Pārājika. It covers all intentional sexual release, it seems.
What about between monks?
If it's consensual between two monks, both are expelled. If one forces the other and the victim doesn't consent, only the active perpetrator is expelled. Again, consent matters.
And then there's that truly bizarre case involving the deer.
Ah, yes, the monk in the forest. A young deer apparently comes up while he's urinating and takes his penis into its mouth, perhaps mistaking it for something else or seeking salt, who knows?
Okay. And the monk.
The crucial point is the monk consents to this happening, consents to the sensation. And because of that consent during the acts, even with an animal in that weird circumstance, it results in a Pārājika.
It just shows how far they went to cover every conceivable and inconceivable scenario where intention and the prohibited act aligned.
Absolutely. But finally, the text also lists clear exceptions. When is it not an offense?
Right. It says no offense for someone who acts unknowingly.
Or unwillingly, like the non-consenting cases we discussed.
Or if someone is genuinely insane or severely mentally disturbed at the time.
Or experiencing such overwhelming physical pain that their intention is clouded.
And importantly, the very first offender.
Sudinna himself. He's implicitly covered here because, as the text noted earlier, the rule simply hadn't been laid down when he committed the act. He couldn't knowingly break a rule that didn't exist yet.
Wow. Okay, from that high-level philosophical debate about the Buddha's nature all the way down to, well, deer and thumbs, this deep dive has really shown how principle and gritty practicality just weave together.
It really has. We've seen how the Buddha's authority was established, not just claimed, how the community faced incredibly real practical challenges like famine, and how this monastic code, the Verañjā, wasn't just dropped down from on high. It really emerged organically, didn't it? From lived experience, from ethical necessity.
Responding to actual problems as they arose.
Exactly, but always with that ultimate goal in mind, supporting the path to liberation. It's a living discipline.
It's truly fascinating seeing how carefully these rules were thought through. Not just the first declaration, but the constant refinement, the testing against all these varied, sometimes really weird case studies. The story of Sudinna, the monkey, the deer, they don't just make an ancient legal text come alive. They really show the practical wisdom behind it all, constantly adapting to human messiness and new situations.
And if you step back and look at the bigger picture, what it really underscores is a fundamental point, I think. That having structure, having clear boundaries, even within a spiritual community, is actually vital.
For its stability. For the teachings to last.
Exactly. For the long-term health and the flourishing of the core teachings, the Dhamma. And, it also reminds us that while the ideal, the aspiration for purity is incredibly high,
human imperfections are just part of the deal. Part
of
the
journey.
So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening in? Maybe it invites you to think about how frameworks and principles, in any part of your life, personal, professional, whatever, how they're often best developed not just in theory, in abstraction, but by actually responding to real-world challenges, to actual human experiences, and, yes, sometimes mistakes.
Yeah, it really prompts reflection on how often the deepest wisdom or the most practical solutions emerge from unexpected places. From conflicts, from difficulties.
And how even rules that might seem rigid on the surface can actually be born from a place of deep compassion and understanding of human nature and that shared aspiration for something higher.
It's a reminder, perhaps, that true wisdom is often both timeless and incredibly practical, grounded in reality.
A really, really compelling deep dive today.
It was fascinating.
Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep digging deeper.